Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of three amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport, which if you are not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel on the Pin Down, you guys absolutely should be. They're taking care of you every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, kind of different times of the week, but talking Pistons basketball. And make sure you are supporting Omari and myself with our written work, Omari over by the Free Press, which obviously brings you this podcast. And then if you haven't subscribed to the Motor City Hoops Substack, I would greatly appreciate it. A little push to get to 500 subscribers over there with post-game analysis of all 82 games this year and draft coverage when the time comes. The nice thing, Omari, we haven't really had to talk about the draft yet because the Pistons are winning a few games. So that's not too bad. But yesterday, Detroit tries to pull the double over the city of Houston. The Lions take care of business late after what sounded like a rough start. I didn't see the game. Detroit Pistons not able to do the same to the Rockets with a tough loss. But the Lions, man, before we get to Pistons talk, they keep moving along.
Yeah, they keep moving along. Shout out to the Chiefs too.
That was ugly. No, they don't deserve credit today, Omari. We
everybody on Twitter is just like, what official ritual did they go through to have the season that they're having right now? I don't want to see you guys in the Super Bowl at all.
I was telling someone that Saturday night, my good friend across the street, we went over and had dinner with them and watched the Alabama game, which ended up being a blowout. But I said, I just pray for not a Lions-Chiefs Super Bowl. I would rather it be Lions in the Super Bowl and the Chiefs not than them playing each other, because I just couldn't be on Twitter for 4 weeks. The 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, from the 2 weeks after the Super Bowl, I just wouldn't be able to interact because my fandom is real. Like, that's where my real fandom lies, Omari, and emotions take over. I will say that field goal block yesterday was sick. Like, that wasn't just like the dude – Leo Chenal, which most people probably don't know, but just ran over the lineman and then was athletic enough to jump and extend out to block it. So that was cool, but the Broncos outplayed them all game. They did not deserve, or they didn't play good enough to win, even though they figured it out. So
yeah, well, clearly they have luck and the universe on their side, but apparently the Lions do too, because that was the first half of that game was like, we're like a classic Lions game, like just can't execute at all. And Jared Goff like progressed to the mean hard with like 5 interceptions, which is crazy. And then they just played perfect football for like the last like 25 minutes of the game, which they have a kicker who was a bricklayer 18 months ago, and he hit 52 and 58-yard field goals to win that game. Like, this is just like, you talk about regressing to the mean. Like, when I'm 30, this is like a lifetime worth of like bad luck. That's just regressing in the opposite direction now. And now they can literally try to throw the game away, and they can't even do that. 5 picks. Like, it was the first game since like,
is that what he really threw?
Yeah, he threw 5 picks. Yeah, and it was like the first game since 1970 a team was down 15 and also closed a 15-point gap or something like that. I forget what the stat was, but anyway, Lions are going to the Super Bowl. Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl. You heard it on the Pistons Post on November 11th, Monday morning. And
here's the thing. The Lions are a good football team. At the end of the day, and listen, luck plays into things, injury luck, all of that plays into it. But whenever you're a good football team that's well coached, and obviously Campbell and his coordinators are good, and he can galvanize that team. Like, it's really cool. I hear people all the time talking about his post-game and pre-game stuff. Like, you make your own luck sometimes. So fortunately, we both have got to watch a really good NFL team for the last 2 years, quite honestly. But right now, a combined, 17-1 between the two teams we support on Sundays, something like that, like something ridiculous. We're pretty fortunate when it comes to NFL football right now, Omari.
Yeah, no, like 9-0 and 8-1. Like, that's crazy. Like, it used to take 2 years to watch 8 Lions wins. Like, this is insane.
So YouTube user says, good morning, guys. Good thing I got to work in time to catch this. We appreciate you joining us. Buy-in says, good evening from Indonesia. Those are always the really cool ones whenever we see the people from outside the country or all over the world that are supporting it. And Speaking of supporting, go ahead and leave some ratings and reviews, guys. We haven't got a bunch of new ones on Apple, so leave a rating and review over there. Spotify, obviously, like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like if you're watching on the YouTube channel, that helps grow and more people find it and all of that. But we do talk Detroit Pistons basketball over here, along with other things, NFL and occasionally food takes. Omari, it's been an interesting week of Pistons basketball since we last recorded. They had a very impressive win over the Lakers, a heartbreaking loss to the Hornets, a really impressive win, late game win over the Hawks, and then finished it off Sunday with another tough loss to, why am I blanking on who they played yesterday, Omari? Who did they? Houston. I just said, what is wrong with me? It's early in the morning. It's early.
It's early. It's 7:30. So,
what 1,000-foot view, airplane view, whatever you want to say. Before we get to specifics, thoughts on that kind of 4-game stretch, 2 wins, 2 losses, lots of close fourth quarter basketball.
Yeah. I think just to see the team competing, man, they are not always competing perfectly. They're competing irregularly in some capacities, whether it's what they were up, I think 19 at the end of the first quarter against Atlanta, right? And they've had leads in here that they just haven't been able to really hold on to. Obviously yesterday was just like, I thought that was a weird one where there was just some shots they should have hit that they probably just shouldn't have, and this loss in Charlotte, just not taking care of simple things down the stretch that cost you at the end, right? So we've seen like every spectrum of this team. I feel like in the past week we've seen the gritty aspect of them, where you host the Lakers and take care of them pretty handedly. You have the in-between games where you almost lose against the Hawks, even though you're up 17 at the end of the first. I just looked it up, and yesterday probably should have won that one. You lose against Charlotte, and you just didn't box out at the end there. So like you're still seeing some of those like frustrating, like a team shouldn't be losing this way losses, but 4-7 is, I think before the season, if you said they'll be 4-7, 11 games in, like nobody would be happy per se, but you'd be like, okay, well, clearly they're off to a better start than last season, right? And they could just as easily be like 6-5 right now, or even 5-6, just if they do 2 plays a little bit better. So I say all that to say, like, they're right where I probably thought they'd be, honestly. Like, they're competing. They're not playing perfect basketball. They're still, like, always closing out. But clearly they have a little bit more to them than they had last season.
I mean, I made this point last episode, but 4-7, so I always do the easiest math possible. That's 11 times 7 is 77 games. So roughly you can multiply it by 7. That's 28 wins. And that's actually not even giving them the full amount, because you didn't get to 82 there with that math. It's like, I would take that. Again, Omari, I would take that. And maybe what I've found is maybe my expectations are just a little bit lower than some fans. And I guess I understand, after you've watched this team not be good for so many years in a row, and especially after last year, I understand people want rapid growth. But I kind of made the comment over the weekend, last few days on Twitter, I want to see this team crawl before they run, let alone walk. And I don't think we even saw this team crawling last year. And so I'm okay with what we've seen. Now, are there things we should critique? Absolutely. And we'll get into it throughout this episode. Should we just say, oh, it's okay that they missed the box out and gave up the game-winning layup, offensive rebound to the Hornets? No, I don't think that we should just go by that and say, oh, no, it's okay because they've won 4 games. I thought the game against the Rockets, Omari, my issue with both of those games really wasn't even the fourth quarter. It's they never took control of the game during the middle portions of the game. Both of those teams were just begging Detroit to jump out to a 15-point lead. Houston was sleepwalking that game just as much as Detroit was. And then they threw the first punch into the third quarter, started the fourth, and Detroit, to their credit, matched it. But then you get yourself into a situation where it's late game, free throws, fouls. The Houston game, again, it was the offensive rebounding. By the way, we should start shouting out like who we thought was the most impressive player from the other team. Because for the Hawks, Dyson Daniels is amazing defensively. And then for the Rockets, Tari Eason, I don't think they even come close to winning that game if it's not for Tari Eason. But those little things snuck up for Detroit. So hopefully they'll learn the lessons, but I think more so take control of the game whenever you have the chance when the other team isn't super locked in during the second and third quarters.
And that's what the really good teams do is
Yeah.
they shut the door on teams, and teams that are figuring things out aren't going to consistently do that. There's like this myth whenever there's a team that's not good but will be better, that they should have like satisfying losses. Like if they're losing it in like dumb ways, it's a sign that they actually haven't grown. And I kind of look at this past week, like this is like these are what those losses look like. Like a loss should always feel frustrating. Like I don't think you could be a team scrapping in position and not just have games where you lose because you're not taking care of simple stuff down the stretch. Honestly, a lot of times that's all it is that separates the quote unquote bad or mediocre teams from the at least average to good teams, and they're still figuring out those minor details, right? Well, I'll say minor details. They're not minor details. They are details you need to win basketball games. But I come away from this past week seeing a team that I think is clearly figuring things out already and has a path to get better, I think, pretty instantly. They haven't been that great at shooting threes. Tim Hardaway's been on fire. He's shooting like 47%. Like I think he's the only guy on the team probably even shooting like 40 at
He's
this
the
point.
only guy over 37.
Yeah.
Jaden Ivey is second on the team. If you take out Paul Reed, who hasn't taken that many, Tim Hardaway Jr. actually was part of my trivia question yesterday because he's shooting so good. He's like, of players in the NBA shooting more than 5 threes a game, Omari, Tim Hardaway Jr.'s top 10 in percentage right now.
Yeah. Like I checked last night, like he's just been like a flamethrower through the first 11 games, which has been good to see because he couldn't shoot at all during preseason. And a guy like him, that it's preseason, right? Like you don't watch.
But we know we're going to get one of those preseason stretches at some point during the season, also, Omari, where he makes like 1 for 20. That's coming also.
Yeah, no, there's going to be ebbs and flows. So there's just some positive regressions for this team coming, I think, just from a shooting standpoint. I think Malik Beasley shooting like 35%. Tobias Harris is shooting 25%. Like you have some other guys who just are not shooting high percentages at this point, or in Isaiah Stewart's case, not really taking threes at all. So to me, they have a lot of room for improvement as a 3-point shooting team. I think some of the improvement we see over the course of the season will just be guys like Tobias and Malik Beasley not missing shots that they normally make. To be 21st, I think, in 3-point percentage and 3-point volume, and you're 4-7 and a couple of bounces from like 6-5 or 5-6. They're pretty much right where, if I had to pick like a realistic best case scenario for like the first 11 games or so, they're not quite there, but I'd say they're probably closer to it than, some others would say, just because I see 3-point positive regression coming for this team at some point.
I think you outlined it all perfectly there, Omari. Yeah. I think what we have to be able to separate is individual game critiques of how they finish a game, how they don't take control of a game that they should, those types of things, while also then the next morning being able to wake up and take the big picture view of what this team has done over 11 game sample. I think it is perfectly fine and reasonable to critique how this team finished that game against Houston on Sunday, because like they had every chance to win and they couldn't grab defensive rebounds. And Houston is the best offensive rebounding team in the NBA, but Detroit knew that going in and they weren't able to capitalize on it. So I think it's okay to question those things and wonder about those things and critique those things, while also then looking at the big picture view and going, this team is 4-7 right now, which is a huge step forward. They have people like Tim Bontemps tweeting about them on a Friday night when Tim Bontemps has only ever talked about the Pistons when he was talking about former Piston Killian Hayes in a not positive light. Like these people don't talk, and you see everybody going, they're fun to watch. Sam Vecini, they're fun to watch right now. They're competitive. I mean, is it still just the Knicks game? Isn't that the only game out of 11 where it's like that's the only game that reminded me of what we saw, I feel like 40 times last year, where they just laid a complete egg. Everything else, I think, has been pretty competitive and competent competitive basketball. And so I think that's where I'm at. I love us critiquing the little things, the little in and outs of a game. And I think we can do that with players as well. We're about to talk about Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey. I want to talk about Isaiah Stewart now that he's in the starting lineup with JD out. I think we can look at those guys, take the big picture view of Omari, and say, they look really good, but man, I would really like to see this or that improve. Real quick from YouTube user Omari, do you know what time it is in Kansas right now?
What time is it here? 7:47. So what is it like? Is it 5:47?
6:47. Actually, 5 counties in Kansas, it is 5:47. 5 counties in Kansas are actually on Mountain Time. The rest of us are on Central. And what day is it? I hopefully you know it's Monday. From Cheryl Balicki, good morning from British Columbia, Canada. I think this is our first Canada, at least shout out specifically. 4:40 a.m. on Monday, Veterans Day in British Columbia, Canada. So kind of took the big picture view of the team right there, Omari. Let's talk about Cade Cunningham. We didn't actually talk about Cade a whole lot last week.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you at with Cade's game? His numbers real quick here. 23 points, 7.3 rebounds, 8.3 assists, half a block, half a steal, just under a block, even though he's kind of had some highlighty ones. It makes it seem like maybe it's more. 47% from the field, 35% from three, just under 79% from the free throw line. Turnovers, 4.7. What did you think? We got 4 more games of Cade, a few triple doubles in those 4 games since we last recorded.
Yeah, overall, Cade's been good. There's always stuff you could nitpick, right? The turnovers have been a tad high. I know some people have kind of felt like he hasn't always been aggressive enough in the fourth quarters, which I figure we'll probably talk about that because I think that's actually been an interesting topic that I don't necessarily agree with. But just his numbers overall, the way he's played, I think this has been a good start to the season for him. You said it, 47% overall. He's another guy I think we'll see some positive 3-point regression for 35%. And, I think just the way he's stepped up and really been the guy for this team overall, that number 2 help hasn't always been consistent from night to night, but they've had a chance to win pretty much every game except one. And I think even with the turnovers, and the turnovers have been a bit up and down for Cade, he is to be the primary reason why they've been in so many of these games. It's like him and then their defense to be. They're 14th in defensive rating. But you couple that with just having it like an actual go-to player who could make those plays for you late. He's had clutch moments on offense and defense. Like, I think despite the turnovers, his playmaking has been really, really solid so far. He's picked up where he left off from last season, I feel like. Still early in the year, a lot of basketball to be played, but from 11 games of Cade Cunningham, I feel like he has clearly taken a step forward as far as being the guy, and we're starting to see him problem solve some of this stuff in real time. I'd be curious to see how much you agree with that, because I know there's been a lot of debate about Cade's play so far, but I've been far more encouraged by far, just from what we've seen through 11 games so far.
Yeah, and you mentioned the defensive playmaking. Everybody's going to remember the one against the Hawks. He actually had a big one against the Rockets as well on Şengün, where if Şengün finishes that, we don't even get kind of the free throw stuff down the stretch of that game where they still had a chance. So he's made those plays. I think what we saw in the Rockets game, I've given Cade a lot of credit, and rightfully so, for how much better he's been defensively this year. I think we saw his limitations in the Rockets game. And everybody has a hard time staying in front of these two guys, but he struggled with Jalen Green and Amin Thompson. Those guys are about as twitchy as it gets in the NBA, though. Like, those just aren't going to be great matchups for Cade, one-on-one point of attack. I think defensively, people get frustrated with how much he gets away from his man off the ball. I think that's just who Cade wants to be. He kind of wants to be a helper and a roamer and stuff like that. But I don't think there's any question he's been better defensively this year. He's been super impactful on the boards. I think the Hawks game is who Cade wants to be. And listen, I don't know anybody associated with Cade. I've never talked to anybody about it. But in that Hawks game, we saw him come out and distribute and rebound and defend and do all of these things. This all-around player, Omari, that's almost averaging 22, 8, and 8 right now. Like, he's right there at 23. I didn't even give him enough credit. To almost 23, 8, and 8. And then good defense. I think that's who Cade wants to be. And then in that Hawks game where he didn't take a bunch of shots in the first half, we saw him close the game out with some big buckets. And I think that's who he can be as a player. Cade's not a guy I'm worried about. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a few players that to me really matter. I mean, I was thinking about this with Tobias. Ultimately, whatever you think about Tobias, he's not in the long-term plan for this team. And that contract and all of that, that's a Trajan Langdon conversation we can get to down the road. It's Cade, it's J.I., it's J.D., it's Stu, it's Asar when he gets back, Ron Holland, maybe even if you want to say Bobby Klintman to see if, you can get a second-round steal. I have no questions about Cade. I'm so, like, I just still don't, Omari. Like, I think he's really, really, really good. The thing that I think maybe people quibble with, but I've always said this, you need a bucket getter next to him. I've always said I thought Cade would be the best player on a contender. I didn't think he would be the leading scorer on the contender. When Detroit is actually competing for top 4 in the East, I think Cade will be their best all-around player. I don't think he'll be their leading scorer. I've thought that from the beginning, and I think we've seen some resemblance of that at times throughout the year. We got to go to break. I don't want to get off Cade Cunningham. I want to continue this conversation, so we'll stay with that right after this.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're going to keep the Cade Cunningham discussion coming. We talked about how good he's been. We should also mention he had 3 straight triple doubles, which is pretty impressive. Let's talk about Cade's defense. What have you seen from him that's made him specifically like that has what made him more impactful on that end compared to before? Is it just the consistency of it, or is he doing some things that we haven't seen before as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a little bit more locked in. I do think he's stronger this year. We talked a lot about that last season. I think you see it on both ends of the floor. I've even had people outside of Detroit make the comment to me of on his drives where he's able to be physical through those drives and all of that. So I think that's part of it as well. He's able to hold up. As people like to point out to me, defensive rebounding is a part of defense, right? Like you have to be able to secure the defensive rebound to finish off a possession. You know who's second on the team in defensive rebounds per game? Cade Cunningham. Tobias actually is first on the team. Then it's Cade. Then it's Jalen Duren. And then it's Isaiah Stewart. So when you look at this team who really has prided itself on defensive rebounding, it's actually these guards, wings, whatever, that are doing a lot of the work along with those bigs. So I think he's just much more locked in. He's much more engaged. We've seen him make plays. We've seen him. He processes the game at such a high level that should always translate defensively. And I just think he's taken a vested interest in his, energy level and intensity. And as you mentioned, consistency throughout the entire year thus far. I mean, to me, he's really has the makings of a two-way impact player. And that's what I always thought he could be. That's how I evaluated him coming out of Oklahoma State whenever he, got drafted number 1. I think we've saw that through 11 games. I never thought Cade was going to be a 30-point-a-game guy. What he's doing right now is really, really good. Do we want to talk about some of the questions? I mean, the turnovers, the 3-point percentage still has to uptick, and the free throws. Like he's got to figure out a way to get to the free throw line more. He's never going to be a true shooting or effective field goal percentage guy until one of the 3-point percentage or the free throw attempts increases.
No, that's absolutely true. I'm looking at his numbers from cleaning the glass right now, and he's getting to the line, or he's drawing shooting fouls a little bit less than he was last season. Last season he was drawing fouls on 8.7% of his possessions, which was like 62nd percentile. So like not superstar level, but also not bad, just at an average rate more or less. And this season he's at 8%, which is at the 47th percentile. What's interesting though is that cleaning the glass has characterized him as a wing in his first 3 seasons, because he always played with, I guess, a guy like a Killian or, a more traditional point guard. And then this season he is a combo, when all 4 seasons, I would argue he should just be classified point guard. Yeah. So his numbers are compared to other wings and combo guards and not to other point guards, which I actually do think makes some of his numbers look At least in comparison, when you look at the percentiles, I think that does kind of hurt him a bit because like there are wings where you're just going to have insane block and steal rates, which a guy with the ball as much as he does is just not going to have that. So that makes it a little bit tougher to put it into context. But overall, I agree with your point that he's got to figure out how to get to the line. And, it's something he's talked about this season too. Like, there's only so much you can do to sell contact. Maybe he just needs to get into the gym with James Harden or Jimmy Butler for like a whole summer and just figure out the tricks of the trade. But I would agree if there's one thing on offense that he has to figure out, it is the foul drawing, because that's what separates the good scorers from the truly great scorers in today's NBA.
He's a primary creator or primary initiator. Like I struggle to say point guard anymore because then people get upset at you because of somebody else that may be on the court. Or he drives the offense. There's no question. And essentially most teams have a single person that does that. Usually there's some exceptions. Like you could argue about some teams and quibble about some teams. Like even the Nuggets, like we don't need to get into this philosophical conversation, but Jokic is the driver of offense for the Denver Nuggets. And so however you want to say it, that's what Cade Cunningham is for the Pistons. I know a lot of people question it. I don't. Like I think he is. I don't think you put him in the 30-point a game scorer role. I don't think he would thrive there. I think people would question him more in that role than what we're seeing right now. I think he's proven that he can create for his teammates and he can drive offense. It's just he has to either become a really good, 3-point shooter or get to the free throw line more and continue to bring those turnover down. And it's some of the silly ones, like against the Rockets, man, the one coming out of the fourth quarter, he's just lackadaisical with the ball. And I think it was Amin just rips it from him. And, that's when Jalen Green got the poster dunk. And it was kind of like, take care of the ball. Like if you take care of the ball, you don't get in that situation. With all those things said, I think he's been awesome this year. I'm not worried about Cade and his role in this franchise and organization and moving forward and any of that. Guys, I see a lot of comments about Stu in the chat. We will talk about Stu. But while we're on the backcourt, I want to go with Jaden Ivey. J.I. coming off, I think, maybe his worst game of the season on Sunday. So I don't want to skew too negative here because of what we've seen recently. But just to give his numbers, Omari, before I get your thoughts, 18.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. He's at 3.4 turnovers, which is just too much for him, where he's not dominating the ball as much as Cade. Right under a steal, half a block on 46, 37, 72 shooting splits. Where are you at with J.I. right now?
Yeah, even after last night, which I agree was probably his worst game of the season. Overall, he's been good, and there's been a lot more positive than negative. I mean, just 11 games in for him to be averaging essentially 19 points a game, shooting 37 from 3 and 46 overall. It's just a huge step forward for him from just an overall efficiency standpoint. I think last night aside, he is somebody who clearly is reading the game at a faster pace. He seems to be much more confident in the control of his own body. He seems to have a much better idea of exactly how fast he is. Bryce, you've seen The Incredibles, right?
Yeah.
You know that scene where like Dash is in the race and they're like trying to get him to not run too fast because they don't want him to give away that he's like a superhero. This has been like it's been like watching Ivy figure out how fast he is.
So I know the premise of the show movie, and so I understand where you're going. I think.
All right, I'll send you a YouTube clip later.
I
make sure we're on the same page.
I will not watch it. I think I know what you're saying though. Dash is like the super speed little kid, right? He's the son. Okay, so they're telling him like, don't run too fast, where it is alarming how fast you are compared to everybody else.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Like J.I. has been he's been in control of his speed. Like he's out there, he knows exactly what he can do with his speed, and just some of the finishes he's had this season are just stuff we did not see as consistently in year 2 or year 1 at all. So overall, like I've been impressed. I think defensively he's been a pest, like I still think like positioning and getting over screens and stuff, he could get better at that. But I think he is more engaged on average on that end. And really, if there's only like one knock I have on him, is just the playmaking at this point. He's got 39 assists and 37 turnovers, which again is not not good, and they need more from him as far as that. But there's been more good than bad from Ji overall this season. I think it's been a step forward for him pretty firmly through the first 3 weeks or so.
And I love that he's getting his flowers. I popped up the comments from YouTube user and Aruna that, he's been good on the ball defensively. Aruna says, yeah, I can't complain about his defense anymore. I did not think this was going to be the storyline, Omari. I did not think this is going to be what we were talking about, is this backcourt playing this good defense. You know what I thought about this morning? Think how good defensively they could be when Asar is back.
Yeah.
Like, you have J.I. and Cade playing defense like this. And again, we'll talk about Stu in just a second. I think if Stu does one thing really well right now, it's on the defensive end. And you could put a pretty good defensive lineup out there when you put Asar out there. And if J.I. continues to knock down catch and shoot, do you have Synergy open? Would you be able to pull his catch and shoot 3-point percentage? If you have Synergy open, I don't have it open on mine, and sometimes
I don't have it open. I can pull it real quick.
Sometimes it throws off my connection if I open it during the middle of a podcast, so I don't like to do that. I feel like he shot well on catch and shoot, I guess is my point. So I'd be interested what the numbers show on catch and shoot versus off the dribble just from three. Here's the other thing, Amar. Think about the 3 matchups he's taken in the last 3 games: LaMelo Ball, Trae Young, and then Jalen Green. Like, those are really tough matchups that he has to take night in and night out. So I should probably give him a little bit more leniency for some of these down offensive games. But as bad as he was Sunday offensively, the 3 games before that, he went for 26, 21, and 18, shooting over 50% from the field, got to the line, 16 times in those 3 games. The turnovers have been bad for a pretty good sample right now, but I think that's an outlier game. What we saw on Sunday. I assume we see a bounce back game on Tuesday, which also is, Amari, the first, the NBA Cup game or whatever they're calling it, against the Heat. They get the Heat and the Raptors Tuesday, Friday for the NBA Cup. Like, those are both winnable games for this team. They could make things interesting with that.
No, they absolutely could. I actually just put up Ivey's 0 dribble numbers on NBA.com, which they kind of borrowed the stats from Synergy. But he's taking 2.7 catch and shoot threes a game, and he's hitting them at a 53% clip.
Okay, so that tracks. Good.
Yeah.
That makes me feel better, because sometimes I'm like, man, I think that looks I looked up his floater mid-range numbers. Those weren't as good as what I thought, but I feel like he's added that to his game this year. I feel like his floater looks okay. His mid-range jumper looks more controlled, but I'm glad those catch and shoot numbers. That was the problem yesterday.
The exact number is the exact numbers are he's 16 of 30 on catch and shoot threes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I don't think he shot one yesterday. Like, that was my issue yesterday. I think he took 3 threes, 4. The 4th one was forced. It wasn't his fault. I think it was into the game or whatever. Yeah. But the other 3 is like, don't take these ones off the dribble. You're too good getting downhill to settle for one off the dribble, unless it's, even if a defender goes under a ball screen, he should just reuse the screen going back the other way and get downhill. The catch and shoot looks really, really good. The off the dribble, at least from 3, just isn't there yet. And he shouldn't settle for that because he's too good getting downhill. That's my issue right now. If I had one thing with Jaden Ivey, defense has been much better. I think the jumper looks better. Shout out Fred Vincent, I assume. And everything is fine, other than the process of his decisions has to be more consistent. Even the late game yesterday, he was going to take a step back 3 in that situation. That's why he turned it over, was he wanted to go, no, just pressure the rim and see if you can get fouled into the free throw line. That was after the Cade missed free throw, which, by the way, was nice. Like, of all the things Cade does really well, he also misses free throws exactly the way you want him to.
Yeah, that was perfect.
That was perfect. But like, Tobias Harris got the turnover in that situation. It wasn't Tobias Harris's fault. It was J.I. that got himself in a tough spot because he wanted to shoot a step back 3. So I think if he could be correct process 10% more of the time, he would be even better. With that said, scaled out view, I've been very, very encouraged through 11 games of what we've seen from Jaden Ivey.
Yeah, and just going back to the 3-point shooting, a lot of the improvement is just shot selection, too. He hasn't been hunting that shot. Like, he's probably taken a couple step backs through 11 games, but I honestly can't recall that many motion threes for him. Almost all of them have been like feet set, or maybe just like one dribble, but just like one clean motion. Like, it seems like he really, really hammered that down this offseason. which is great to see. If you have it, if you have more thoughts on
No,
JI, we can get there. Beyond that, like Isaiah Stewart, like I
yeah,
do think
let's
it's worth
yeah.
talking about for sure. I know people are talking about him in the comments. Uh, so we've talked about Stu a bit just through the first 2 weeks of the season. Now that he's been a starter for 2 games, and we've seen him in like different contexts. Defensively, what have you liked about him this season, and have you seen anything different defensively since he's been in the starting lineup?
I mean, his movement ability, and somebody said in the comments, I want to give them credit. Just Football Academy Australia, Stu is number 3 in rim protectors. Did you see this? Like, I haven't seen that stat. Sometimes I don't love those stats, but man, that tracks. The eye test tracks there. It's amazing how many. I'm going to give him credit for forcing misses because it's consistently happened. You know what I mean, Omar? Like, there's some games where guys miss shots and it's like, oh, he was great protecting the rim. It's like, was he, or did they just uncharacteristically miss shots? I feel like because of his length, his timing, his physicality, he makes guys miss, along with just straight up blocking some as well. But what always stands out to me is watch him in drop. And like, I don't mean to do this. Like, I feel, but like, watch the difference between him and Jalen Duren in drop coverage. And the way Stewart is able to drop his hips, Omari, and then his hand activity. So I'm demonstrating, if you guys are only listening on audio. If you're on video, you see me here early in the morning but like, he's always playing cat and mouse with the ball handler. He's able to backpedal and all of that. Like, he's just really, really good in that. He gives you some switchability. I just think he's a really nice chess piece on the defensive end. So I like what he brings on that end of the floor. It's been really good. And he's a better rim protector than I've given him credit for. And I've always been a Stu fan.
Yeah, I thought he's played with great verticality this season. Like, even last night when Şengün is just, I mean, Şengün's a tough matchup for anybody.
He was murdering in the lane. It was crazy. Yeah. And those shots don't even look like they should go in. It's so awkward, but he was getting buckets.
Yeah, like Şengün's touch is insane. But even then, I still thought Stu did a decent job just making things uncomfortable for him, whether it was just getting the contest or this or that. Like, Şengün's hitting like turnaround mid-range jumpers. Like, there's only so much you could do about that. But like defensively, I just think he's been great. He clearly understands what the opposing team is trying to do on every single play. Just his positioning, the way he uses his body, his hands, like, again, the verticality, positioning, all that. Like, I feel like this has been like the best defensive stretch he's had like in his career, and he's always, I think, since a rookie, been a good rim protector and pretty good defensively overall. But he's been like the engine for this team in a lot of ways, and I think just the energy, the hustle, the locked inness he brings defensively to that role. I think his size, like, in some ways, actually does help him as a rim protector, just because he could kind of like maneuver so well and kind of get into tight spaces if he needs to, and he just moves his feet so well. I've been really impressed with what he's done for this team defensively. I really would say he's been the engine for this team. I think he's a primary reason why they were competitive in the last 2 games. Just even if shots aren't falling, just like not letting teams score more than like 105 points per game. Like I said, their defensive rating is 14th right now. A lot of that's been Stu. I've been really impressed with him so far. It's just figuring out offensively, right? Like, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but at the same time, he still hasn't really taken that many threes, and he just hasn't had that many even scenarios where it's just clean catch and shoots. And I'm curious to see if that changes as the season goes on, because if he starts locking on threes and he maintains what he's giving you on defense, we've always talked about Stu as being this like ideal, like modern center that basically gives you no holes on offense or defense. And for the offensive end, a lot of that to me still comes down to him really becoming more of a Brook Lopez or Grant Williams type. Like, you have to defend him from 3 because he's going to take 5 or 6 if you let him.
Yeah. Let's go to a short break. And then when we come back, I got thoughts on Stu's offense, because I want to continue that conversation, what it means about starting, coming off the bench, that type of stuff. But let's get to a break, and then we'll continue on Isaiah Stewart when we come back.
All right. We are back with segment 3, and we're going to continue our talk on Isaiah Stewart. So I'll let you go ahead and take it away, Bryce.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, again, the thing with Stu and the 3-point shooting, it was never solely about just making him a 4-man. It was about making him more effective as an offensive player because he doesn't have great length. He doesn't have great vertical pop. You can see the difference. They even ran some good pick and roll stuff with him and Cade in the game on Sunday. I mean, Stu was 7 of 9 in that game, but it's completely different. You know, whenever Cade and Duran do have some really good lob chemistry, it's not the same with Stu. With Stu, you got a pocket pass, and then lots of times he'll catch. Then he may have to stop and pivot. He may have to throw it up on the backboard and then go get his own offensive rebound and tip it back. It's definitely not as aesthetically pleasing as just to throw it up and let Jalen Duren go get it. In the last couple games, he has been able to figure out the finishes. He's 12 of 17 in the last 2 games, you know, as a starter. But there are some questions. I still have some worries about him as a pick and roll partner for these guys because there are just limitations. Even as a short roller, I don't think he has great touch, and I don't completely trust his decision-making, which is why I've always thought if he picks and pops and can knock that down, then whenever they have to respect that, you open up that driving lane for Cade or J.I. or whoever's operating the ball screen with him. Or the other thing I love, this is why I always like the idea of pairing him and Asar together in their minutes, is you can put Stu in the corner, and then you can use Asar as the role guy in a way that we've seen the Rockets use Amin, and then you can do some creative things. So I will stay steadfast in thinking that Isaiah Stewart needs to be able to space the floor and have at least a little bit of gravity at the 3-point line.
Yeah, because there's still, to me, maybe for people who watch the Pistons regularly, there's like for some a disconnect between the player Isaiah Stewart is and maybe who you envision him to be. You mentioned that he's gotten better at finishing at the rim, and he has. I think some of that's just better comfort, you know, his teammates understanding how to get him the ball. It seems like he's had a lot more uncontested looks at the rim, but he's not navigating through the trees as he was in the first 6-7 games as much, which helps a lot. But yeah, the 3-point shooting for him will be the key because it's just always something he's going to give up as a vertical rim threat just because of the lack of length and pop compared to other NBA centers. It's nothing really that he's not doing. It's just, you know, the other guys at that position are a little bit more suited for that role. So, yeah, if you're picking and popping with him, you mentioned Asar, and we talked about that a lot. You know, Asar just being a guy who has 6'6", has, like, if you're ranking 6'6" guys with vertical pop, Asar's got to be in like that, he's got to be top, yeah, like 1%. He's got to be like top 5 in the league as far as his leaping ability. Like it's crazy, and I'll be curious to know, and we'll know like once Asar gets back how that plan changes. But how much did Asar's injury or lack of availability alter their plans coming into the season, where now JB's telling Stu like, hey, we want you to roll and do this and that? Because Asar, in a weird way, like I do think the Asar is actually built in a way like with Paul Reed too, and you know, another guy that can knock down shots. You know, just Asar is the connective tissue, being a like sort of a small ball 4 that this team needs. So yeah, I've enjoyed watching Stu this season. I think he's really you know, settled into his role as being the defensive engine for this team. And yeah, it's just the offensive end. You know, does he continue to roll, or do we eventually see him get back to popping and getting up 3 or 4 a game?
Speaking of Paul Reed, shout out. Like I can't decide what I think about Paul Reed, but you definitely notice him. Like he makes his presence felt whenever he is on the floor. I looked, B-Ball Reference isn't updated this morning with their 11th game, but going into the game yesterday, he was leading the team by a wide margin in stocks per 36, which per 36 is sometimes a little funky, especially with a guy who hasn't played a lot, but he brings energy, effort, and you know he's on the floor. Omari, as we start to close this out, and then we'll get to some comments. There's been some good comments, questions that I want to get to. I want us each to close out with a player we want to talk about. So just pick one of the guys we haven't talked about, and we'll each go with one. As you're thinking about that, a couple tweets. Tweet House says Stu wasn't even being guarded by Şengün at points on the perimeter. Definitely needs to be a threat from 3. Yeah, and that gives us multiple guys that aren't, because the guy I want to talk about is Ron Holland, who is not being guarded at the 3-point line. And I think we're getting close to a breaking point with his minutes. And then K Barb says Stu not shooting threes is baffling. Feels like 2 years of encouraging development down the drain. I think that's what's so frustrating is we went through the growing pains of watching Stu try to figure this out, and it looked like he figured it out. and you see the value it could bring. And then now it's like, oh, never mind. We're not worried about it anymore. So I think that's what's kind of frustrating. I'm going to talk about Ron Holland unless you wanted to talk about Ron Holland. If you do, I can pick somebody else, but I'll
You
let
can
you
go because I was going to talk about Ron, and then you brought
No,
him up.
you
So
go,
we can just stick with Ron.
And I'll pick somebody else then. I'll think about who I want to talk about. So you start off with Ron.
Yeah. Overall, I've enjoyed watching Ron play. I like the energy he brings. I like just watching him figure things out in real time. That play he had late against Charlotte, where he steals the ball, and then you could tell he's kind of thinking in real time as he's taking the ball down the floor, like exactly where should I go with this? And he just finishes the layup. But I just like his body language was just so very clearly like, okay, yeah, I guess I'm doing this. Like, yeah, this is my moment, and I'm going to go in and finish. And he did it. He should not be taking 6, 7 threes. And we kind of saw this with Asar last year too. I don't know why this team has a habit of like when teams leave the worst shooter open, they just keep feeding that shooter the ball to try to get them going. It works sometimes. They would do it with Asar sometimes too, where he's getting like 3 or 4 threes up because that's what the defense wants. And it's like, just don't keep feeding him that shot and giving the defense the exact shot it wants. Like last night, I thought that was weird. Like, if you have 4 straight possessions ending with Ron Holland 3-pointers, that means you need to.
Starting with Ron Holland 3-pointers, the ball didn't even go anywhere else. It was just one pass or Ron Holland dribble up and shoot.
Yeah, it's like that's not even like a Ron Holland thing. It's just the offense should not be doing that, and that's not his game at this point. Like he should be taking it if he's open, but that shouldn't be like the priority for the play. But with that aside, I think he's sort of giving the team exactly what we expected, which is just sort of like this raw, not like manic, but like he's a guy that's going to come in and play extremely hard. He could defend, he could rebound. Like he's got a functional handle for his size, right? Like he's like crossing people over, but absolutely he can get to where he needs to go to on the court. And he's gotten some trust from his coaching staff too, where they're like, yeah, we're going to allow you to prove yourself for the first half. And if you're playing well, you might play some key fourth quarter minutes too, which he did against Charlotte, which he did against the Lakers. He's had opportunities. He's taken advantage of them. And I just don't want to see him taking 6, 7 threes because he keeps being open. And those are my thoughts on Ron Holland. Like overall, there's been a lot of good through the first 11 games.
Yeah, I mean, the energy's good. We see flashes even of the finishing at the rim. He had one through, I think it was Ricochet, that he just like played through him and finished through the contact. One of 3 things is about to happen because teams have figured it out. They're going to start putting their center on Ron Holland, which helps matchups elsewhere and helps them clog the lane and rim protect. Either Ron Holland is going to start making shots or he's going to catch that ball and go right into a DHO where now his man's playing 10 feet off. So when he gives the handoff to Cade or Ivy or Beasley or Tim Hardaway Jr. or whatever, there's nobody there to help or switch or whatever, or the minutes are going to really decrease because they can't play him with the defender helping off the way they are right now. I mean, teams are just going to dare him and question his confidence. And the one thing is, I don't think Ron's going to lack for confidence, which I actually love, but as you mentioned, you can't have 4 straight possessions that end with Ron Holland threes. And I think he went 1 for 4 in those possessions. And also, especially when Stu's not shooting threes, so that's already not, there was just too much emphasis put on floor spacing for this type of stuff to happen. So like they just, this can't be what happens moving forward. So I one of those 3, because I think we're getting to the breaking point now. The teams have figured it out. There's enough of a sample. You can easily go to the numbers now, especially, and see that he's 15% on 2.5 attempts per game. And so teams are going to test him and make him prove it. Now, if he steps out and makes 2, maybe that team adjusts on the fly. But either got to start making shots, you got to figure out the DHO stuff or a way to make them pay for it, or the minutes may have to change. So, we will talk about the defense before we get out of here. Real quick on Tobias Harris. Will be my guy then. I've warmed up to the mid-post isolations a little bit, Omari. They do draw gravity. They do draw doubles, especially if it's like when he did it to Jalen Green, I was like, oh, yeah, run that again. When it's somebody a little bit bigger like Jabari Smith Jr., I'm not as excited about it. I think defensively, he at least gives you a body to throw at those matchups, which this team hasn't really had. He also has great hands. Like he's very active and accurate with his hands, swiping at the ball. Really good there. Omari, can I get this man to make some corner threes? That's all I need from Tobias right now. I need Tobias to elevate his jumper because it's so flat right now and make some corner threes. And if Tobias would do that, I would shut up. But that's what I need from Tobias Harris, is to knock down corner threes more consistently. As you mentioned earlier, this team cannot have Malik Beasley 35%. You can probably live with that at 7.5 attempts. But Fontecchio at 30, Harris at 26, Holland at 15, Stu not even shooting them. They got it. They got to start making shots. And specifically Tobias Harris, please. I appreciate the rest of your game. Make corner threes, my guy.
Yeah, it was. Which game was it last week? It might have been the Lakers game. It might have been. It was one of the games last week. Like Tobias had like 4 straight quarter threes from the exact same spot and just couldn't get one of them to fall. And it's just like, when I talk about positive regression, I'm talking about that, because it's like Tobias is not a 25% shooter, and he's not a guy that on average is going to miss 4 out of 4 right corner threes. Like beyond that, like I think he's given this team a lot of what is needed, just from like a point. Like his rebounding has been really good.
Oh yeah, I should have mentioned his rebounding. That's a great call, Omari.
You know, like the rebounding I think has been great, and there's been like a lot of positive. It's just the outside shots have not been falling, and it could just be one of those weird early season things, like new scheme debates. You're still kind of finding your rhythm in a new environment, but really that's just my main knock. I mean, and you know, just given a guy that's been a good 3-point shooter for like a decade now, you know, you almost want to wait till like game 2025 before you start to read a little bit more deeply into it. But that has been an issue so far. You know, for a guy with that shot volume, you definitely need him to knock down more shots, obviously. So
let me ask you this. Going back to the 2017-2018 season to last year. So, and this is a 500 game sample size for Tobias Harris, Omari. You want to guess what he shot from corner threes over that 500 game sample size? Corner threes only.
39%?
42%.
42%. Wow.
You know what he's shooting right now for the Detroit Pistons on corner threes?
A lot less than that.
24%.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So there you go.
Like, listen, I'm kind of just, yes, it is a small sample. This is a little bit of a bit. Like I'm kind of joking a little bit, but I would like to see him make him. I think he will. The point is, and this is why, again, like whenever, like it made sense, right? Like bringing him in made sense, because for 500 games, he shot corner threes at 42%. And it was like, just come in and do that. That would be great. It will get back there. Okay, let's run through these really fast. YouTube user Stu's not a starting center. Very good backup. Nice box score versus Houston. Obviously, Şengün. Amari, are you still on that bandwagon? Or now that we see Stu in the starting lineup because of the Duren injury, unfortunately, are you starting to, where are you at? Like Duren returns in a week. Let's say, I'm not reporting that. I'm not a reporter. You're not reporting that, I don't think. But Duren right back into the starting lineup, in your opinion?
Yeah, I was fine with Stu as the backup big, because you could still close games with him. And I do think what Duren gives you as a rebounder and as a lob threat is good. It does open things up offensively. You know, defensively, he has to get better, obviously, but I think just starting off games with him in the lineup has been fine. You know, I think what he gives you offensively and as a defensive rebounder is valuable. And like Stu, I like the way he comes into the game, and just you can just immediately sense that difference. I think if you're going to have a bench unit, if you're leaning on your bench unit in any sense, it needs to be a bench unit that brings in a different energy when they check in. I think that's what makes bench units good, is when, you know, it's almost like, you know, you're pitching against a fastball and then the next pitcher comes in and they just have like a great changeup, you know, like it's just, I like Stu in that role. You know, you could close games with him. You know, I think that's fine, but I do like seeing what Duren brings. And I also just think giving Duren those reps, continue to give him those reps in year 3 is important for him. So I would not switch that up personally. You know, I think the roles that they were in to start the season have both been like good for them and for this team.
Yeah, I mean, I said the most important thing to come out of this season is you have to know what you have in J.I. and J.D., and by doing that, you put them in the best situation to be successful. If by the end of the year you don't think Jalen Duren's a starting center, then so be it. But I want to find out. And this leads right into Brian says, how much will Ivey and Duren cost for the next contract? I don't think we have those numbers yet. I don't think we have those answers yet until this season is up. If Jaden Ivey consistently hits catch and shoots for the entire season, and defends this way, I think that really changes the number. If 3 months from now we're like, oh, he's back to a 33% catch and shoot 3-point shooter, or can't take primary defensive matchups, or if Jalen Duren comes in and all of a sudden he's really protecting the rim. So I don't mean to dodge the question. It's just, I don't think we can answer that specific question until we have a bigger sample size, Omari.
No doubt. We have about 5 more minutes. Are there any players we haven't gotten to or any questions we can?
I was just going to run through these really, really quick.
Yeah.
So YouTube user said, JB has made this team pretty good on defense. This is amazing considering the roster. 1,000%. You probably don't have your best defensive player on top of all of that. And they didn't really bring in any defenders this offseason. They've been the exact opposite of what I thought they were going to be. I thought they might be a top 15 offense and a bottom 5 to 7 defense, and it's been the complete opposite. I've never been more wrong about that. And yes, huge shout out to JB, because it's not, there have been individual improvement. We talked about it with Cade and JI, but the defensive scheme and cohesion's been a big part of it, Omari.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it, but so much of defense is just organization and want to. And it seemed like over the past 2 or 3 seasons, there was just so much confusion on defense as far as where players are supposed to be, as far as like the guard immediately dying on the screen and then just the rest of the organization completely breaking down from that point on. We just haven't really seen that as much this season. It seems like every defensive possession, there's been a locked inness and a want to that we just haven't seen. And I think that's just been up and down the roster. You see Aruna.
No, Aruna. No. The short answer is no.
No. THJ has been locked in on defense.
THJ is leading the NBA in charges drawn, Omari. I would have lost my house if you would have tried to bet me that before the season. So no, Aruna. That is not THJ's rep, is not as being this kind of defender.
It's funny, I watched THJ on certain possessions, and I'm like, am I seeing this the same as everybody else? He's rotating perfectly and just completely locked in. I've been really impressed by that. Up and down the roster, there's been just a clear we understand that we need to do this to at least be an average basketball team. Yep. And again, you're 14th in defensive rating with a starting center who's still figuring things out. A lot of that's just from your wing defenders, from Cade and Ivey setting a certain standard on that end. Isaiah Stewart in his minutes, pretty much being, if not the best defensive player on the floor, one of the best 2 or 3 at all times.
I think Stu's the best defensive player on the team right now,
and he is right now for sure. No doubt. I don't think there's any question about that. So. Again,
currently playing because Asar hasn't played.
Yeah, and that's just maturity too. I think that's a clear area that the team's grown up in. It's just the maturity to understand we have to bring this every single possession. And again, you're 14th for defensive rating, and you've been terrible defensively the entire time I've covered the team, which this is year 5. So that's been a clear win, I think, for this team and for the coaching staff through the first month of the season or so.
I mean, what it may be is they won 14 games last year and endured a 28-game losing streak, and that sucks. And sometimes I think you think you can fix it in the moment, but when you're going through it, it's not that easy. What these young guys had was an off season to go through and look back and go, wow, that was awful. Maybe we should do something about it. And then a coaching staff comes in and all of that gives them the tools and the rotations and the scheme and everything like that to execute it. Again, I'm glad you said that. To be average, to be competitive, right? That's still the world this team is in, is can you just be competitive every night? And Derek says it specifically about Cade, giving us what we've needed on most night. When he's come up short, he's come back the next game and made up for it. I think that's what's been impressed me the most about this team. I thought they were going to get blown out in that Rockets game, Omari. I thought when Houston started their run, they were going to shut it down, because that's what we've seen in the past, and they didn't. They fought back. I know they still lost it at the end. There's been games where I'm like, man, that was kind of ugly. How are they going to respond? I'm fascinated to see how they respond on Tuesday against the Heat. Tweet House says, just getting caught up. Good morning, guys. Progression isn't linear, not an excuse, just reality. So true, right? It's going to go up and down. There's going to be another Knicks game coming up at some point. Ryan Turquinto, love this show. We appreciate it. Thank you for everybody that joined in. Again, hit the like button, help us grow. Go leave a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify. That helps us grow as well. And then Will J, good morning, fellas. Finally get to catch a show live while I'm at work. Hopefully your boss doesn't watch the show as well, Will J. No, we appreciate you so much. Speaking of work, Omari, I do have a day job. It starts in 20 minutes. So you got to get us out of here, and we'll be back next week.
Bryce, we'll let you get out of here so you can teach today's youth as the teacher you are. And yeah, big thanks to everybody who joined us bright and early this morning. And with that, I'll close this out. So big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Dakota Avery Nichols, and big thanks to Wes Davenport. And we'll talk to you all next week.